Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Connie Kim. North Korea continues to escalate tensions with South Korea, threatens further actions, and goes as far as to criticizing the South Korean president's message of calling for peace with North Korea as brazen-faced and preposterous. Today we discuss Pyongyang's intentions behind pressuring Seoul and the possible situations that may unfold on the Korean peninsula. Joining us today is Bruce Bechtol, former intelligence officer at the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, and now a professor at Angelo State University in Texas. He's the author of 5 books dealing with North Korea, with his latest work titled North Korean Military Proliferation in the Middle East and Africa. Scott Snyder also joins us today. He's a senior fellow for Korea Studies and director of the program on U.S. Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, examines the trajectory of South Korean foreign policy and offers predictions. So good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Connie.
Good morning.
Morning. Now, I want to first get an assessment of this current situation. After North Korea blew up the Inter-Korean Liaison Office, it said it's going to redeploy troops to the Kaesong Industrial Complex, the Mount Kumgang Resort, reinstall guard posts along the DMZ, and resume frontline military exercises. So help us understand why North Korea is doing this and how you assess the situation right now.
I think what the North Koreans are trying to do as an assessment based on the evidence is that they are trying to push South Korea to pressure the United States to allow loopholes in the sanctions that are currently imposed on North Korea, because they're really hurting North Korea right now, the sanctions. The sanctions are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is to put pressure on North Korea. So I think that's the main idea behind this. As for what the future holds, I think it would be very simple for them to simply reoccupy those guard posts along the DMZ. And again, to garnish publicity, remember that joint security area that South Korean and American tourists go to so often, JSA, that has been de-armed. They may rearm that area as well, just to make a big show for the press. And of course, a violent incident along the northern limit line or the DMZ is possible if they want to push the envelope going beyond just rhetoric and show.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Snyder, Dr. Bechtol just mentioned that North Korea may be seeking to relax sanctions by pressuring South Korea. Do you see any other intentions behind North Korea doing this?
Yeah, I don't disagree with Dr. Bechtol's overall description of what I would suggest is North Korea's default set of objectives since the beginning, well, for a long time now, for the last couple of years. But what's really intriguing to me is the timing, the mode, the pretext under which these actions are taken. And I think that some of those focus us more on internal objectives that North Korea may be trying to achieve, or internal problems that North Korea might have in terms of economic difficulties or other challenges that require efforts to unify the population against an external threat, or the health issues that might have made North Korea more sensitive to issues related to ensuring continuity of leadership. And so the thing that's really, I think, notable and kind of surprising about this particular incident has been Kim Yo-jong's role, these statements that have all come out in her name, showing her to be ordering and in control. And I think that is particularly concerning as an internal factor because the last time that we saw provocations that led to bloodshed between the two Koreas was in the context of the elevation of Kim Jong-un to a successor role. So I'm a little bit concerned about the internal dynamic and the possibility that it may lead to actual conflict before we can expect a dissipation of tensions around the border between the two Koreas.
North Korea has reportedly removed covers from its coastal artillery guns on the west coast. And we have heard that North Korea has deployed some troops on the vacant guard posts along the DMZ. So are you saying that there is bigger possibility for North Korea to be taking out these threats into actions?
I think if they were going to do an attack on the NLL, they would not take the covers off their artillery as to warn us that they were going to attack. We base it on past precedent. When they conduct violent provocations, and of course a violent provocation is different than something that's just designed for show. Violent provocations are always designed to happen as a surprise. So we know the general area that they're probably going to have a violent provocation. It's probably going to be the Northern Limit Line or the DMZ. We just don't know how they're going to do it, because if they are planning for that, because the modus operandi for violent provocations changes every time they do a new one.
Mm-hmm. Scott, would you agree?
Yeah, that's a very important point that Dr. Bechtol is making, and it's what makes the foreshadowing so unusual at this time. It really does raise some interesting questions about whether or not North Korea will be satisfied simply to demolish inter-Korean relations on their own territory, which is a more risk-averse way of expressing frustration, or whether indeed they're going to cross the line. And I think that Bruce is right that crossing the line on the normal template usually involves a guerrilla action that exercises the element of surprise.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at the South Korean government's response. They shifted from its seemingly conciliatory tone after North Korea took aim with the South Korean president's message commemorating the 20th anniversary of the June 15th declaration. It called it rude and senseless. So how did you see South Korea's change in tone on North Korea?
Well, in many respects, the statement by Kim Yo-jong was so personal and so coarse and so direct that it already had pretty much destroyed any efforts to pursue dialogue. And it really, I think, was a cold slap in the face for the Moon administration. And now we've seen, I think, a certain measure of recognition that there's a need to be prepared for additional potential provocation. And so the latest statement, I think, from the Blue House and from the defense establishment in Korea clearly puts the onus on North Korea. We've seen a kind of pause. The North Korean military, I guess, according to Nonam Shinmun, is awaiting orders. And the question is whether or not the statements from South Korea are requiring any kind of reevaluation or readjustment in terms of North Korea's own thinking about the next step.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bechtol, so Mr. Snyder said it was a slap on South Korea's face when it was trying to amend inter-Korean relations. But what did South Korea do so wrong for North Korea to be taking such drastic measures?
South Korea did nothing wrong. I think President Moon's administration has gone out of their way to try and work with the North Koreans, including in rhetoric. They've been very careful with the public statements that they made. Scott, I totally agree with Scott's point where he said that this was aimed as a personal insult against President Moon Jae-in, which is pretty striking. But as far as if they actually did something wrong, no. I mean, they followed sanctions because they're required to by the United Nations.
If we look at the situation on the surface, this whole tension escalated in response to the defectors' anti-leaflet campaigns. But Mr. Snyder, do you think there is a bigger reason for this?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the leaflet campaigns, they've been a source of irritation, but they're really a pretext for the current rising in tensions. And what we've seen, I think, over time is an expansion and an explication from Kim Yo-jong of longstanding frustrations in the inter-Korean relationship. And I think that the thing that we should be concerned about from a U.S. perspective is whether or not those frustrations also begin to metastasize to draw in U.S. North Korea. Just as Kim Jong-un used Moon Jae-in as an intermediary in order to jumpstart diplomacy, it's also possible that this downturn in the inter-Korean relationship is intended to be used as a warning and as a signal of potential escalation in the U.S.-North Korea relationship.
Mm-hmm. The U.S. urged North Korea to refrain from counterproductive measures. So how do you think the U.S. can play a role in de-escalating the tensions on the Korean Peninsula?
The way North Korea is most likely to get the United States involved is not going to be a violent provocation, believe it or not. I think the thing that's most likely to get the United States heavily involved in this is if they do another nuclear test, or if they test an ICBM capable of hitting the United States, like the Hwasong 14 or the Hwasong 15. Those are things that President Trump and Kim agreed that North Korea would put a moratorium on back in 2018. So to make a striking move like that would be something that would, in fact, probably get the United States involved in this.
So, Dr. Bechtol, just to follow up on that point, so do you expect continued messaging from the U.S. to refrain from further provocations?
The president is likely to eventually feel he has to comment on that. I think his comments will probably be meant to ease tension, not ratchet tension up, and be supportive of our ally in Seoul. Unless, and he'll still be supportive no matter what, obviously, but unless they do something that is actually more than just a move designed for the cameras. And I think that's coming.
And we heard a senior U.S. defense official say that it continues to consult with its South Korean ally about the possibility of resuming the U.S.-South Korean military exercises and deploying the U.S. strategic assets on the Korean Peninsula. So do you expect these continued messages from the Defense Department as well, Mr. Snyder?
Well, I think that if the North Koreans are going to take the environment around the DMZ back to the status quo ante as it existed in 2017, then a logical step for the U.S. and South Korea is to also revert to the exercise cycle and training for readiness that had existed at that time. And so I do believe that the North Koreans have actually opened up the space to have that discussion. It is a timely discussion because the focus at this time is really going to be on defense and deterrence until the typhoon that the North Koreans have announced has blown over in terms of their own actions.
As of now, North Korea's message to the U.S. isn't as extreme as it has been to South Korea. How do you think the North Koreans are going to deal with the U.S.?
It's not necessarily clear at this time whether this is primarily focused on South Korea. That's a lower risk proposition for the North Korean leadership, or whether the North Koreans may assess in the context of U.S. domestic politics that there's a certain kind of opportunity in trying to escalate prior to the election.
North Korea did say that it sees little reason to maintain that personal relationship with President Trump, and it did say it's going to build up its reliable force to counter U.S. military threats. So how do you expect, Dr. Bechtol, for North Korea to be dealing with the U.S. going forward?
Well, that was a very disappointing statement the North Koreans made, that there was no need for our president and Kim Jong-un to meet again. This could change overnight. The North Koreans typically go from this raising the tensions on purpose to suddenly bringing about a peace campaign all of a sudden. So after the elections, for example, if Donald Trump is reelected, the North Koreans may open the door again and say they want to talk to President Trump. That kind of thing is just not easy to predict because of the fact that the way they've behaved in the past has not been routine in any way.
We'll have to take a closer look at what kind of posture North Korea takes on the U.S. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Bechtol and Mr. Snyder.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That does it for today's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis. Goodbye. Bechtol.